Throughout history, a leadership title often had more than just the job behind it. There were social and cultural weights to it as well, some cases to the point of myth. Many kings were seen as some form of divinely appointed, or at least endorsed, and that's a lot of pressure to live up to. But naturally, aside from the many people who didn't live up to the given weight of their title in a normal way, you also had the people that were seen as bad to the point of damaging the title and its mythological image. How could God or the gods be so wrong? What if some people begin to question the power of the title? At many different times in history, a civilization or kingdom arrived at this problem and decided out of anger or embarrassment to try and fix that problem by erasing the bad leader from history altogether, whether actively or passively. Or, sometimes a particular leader also wanted to do it because he was an asshole. In 1689, Christoph Schreider coined the term damnatio memoriae, or condemnation of memory, to describe this concept. In more modern times, you might cite the examples of something like Stalin purging figures from Soviet government records and attempting to erase their contributions and appearances in photographs. For ancient societies, though, this was usually more complete. Not everyone could read and write. Access to historical knowledge was more limited. That simply meant there was less to scrub and fewer people who'd remember. But this naturally leads to the question, how would we know about it if they actually managed to pull it off? If they succeeded, then there'd be no evidence left, right? Well, remember, they're scrubbing records and monuments to keep it out of people's living memory, but that's not everything a historical figure can leave behind. Let's go over 3 notable historical examples of this and how it either ultimately failed or became undone or rediscovered later on. One of the oldest and most famous examples of damnatio memoriae is the ancient Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten. Originally crowned as Amenhotep IV around 1353 BC, he changed his name to Akhenaten after adopting a new monotheistic religion, replacing the pantheon of ancient Egyptian gods with a single sun disk god named Aten. Rituals were altered to only worship Aten, a new capital for Egypt was built called Akhenaten, also known as Amarna, but it didn't stop there, as there were notable changes in art styles on monuments, royal decrees were given in a much more common version of the ancient Egyptian language. It was an overhaul of the Egyptian bureaucratic system. These changes lasted for a few decades before being reversed by the pharaoh Tutankhaten, likely in the 1320s BC. Tutankhaten then changed his name to the much more well-known Tutankhamun. However, despite reversing these changes, Tutankhamun's general eventually seized the throne and became the pharaoh Horemheb around 1319 BC, and Horemheb decided to make an official policy to condemn and erase the pharaohs before him all the way back to Akhenaten, considering the entire Atenism period of Egypt a disgraceful embarrassment. The damage was enough to where the exact number of mostly short-reigned rulers is even still disputed. The capital of Akhenaten was abandoned, monuments were destroyed with some of their stones being reused for Horemheb's own personal monuments, many statues of Akhenaten were defaced, including even the face of his presumed sarcophagus. Akhenaten was effectively lost to history until the ruins of Akhenaten were rediscovered in 1891. Akhenaten's presumed burial site was soon discovered in 1907, and of course the other Amarna-era pharaohs were mostly rediscovered at later dates, the famous example being the rediscovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. So their legacy was erased for nearly 3,000 years. It's a long time, but eventually they were rediscovered. During the Roman Empire, there were many examples of damnatio memoriae done as official policy passed by the Roman Senate, notably for the emperors Caligula, Nero, Domitian, and Commodus. The assassination of Commodus in particular not only led to his condemnation by the Roman Senate, but a tumultuous period known as the Year of the Five Emperors, a time that 5 different people claimed the Roman throne and a civil war began. By the year 197, Septimius Severus had won that struggle and was the undisputed emperor, beginning the new Severan dynasty. Septimius Severus, aside from establishing a new imperial dynasty, was notable for being the first Roman emperor not born in Italia. In fact, he was born in modern-day Libya, and while he's not what we would today consider black, he was still a dark olive-skinned North African, and therefore darker-skinned than previous Roman emperors. Despite this, because of his class and Roman citizenship, he was seen as just as Roman as any other Roman citizen, mainly because racial-type prejudice in Rome wasn't based on skin color as much as whether you were a civilized cultural Roman or a barbaric outsider. Septimius Severus had 2 sons named Caracalla and Geta. Caracalla was made co-emperor by Severus in 198, while Gaeta was also made co-emperor in 209. While a father-son-son imperial rule seems nice and wholesome, the truth is Caracalla and Gaeta absolutely hated each other. While Septimius Severus died in February of 211, the two brothers couldn't even peacefully coexist for an entire year. They were rightfully paranoid of the other trying to assassinate them, and eventually in December of 211, Caracalla tricked Gaeta by asking their mother to arrange a peace meeting. Gaeta then showed up without his bodyguards, and Caracalla had centurions murder him on the spot in front of their mother. Caracalla then ordered a damnatio memoriae on his brother, and Gaeta's name and image began to be scrubbed out of everything they could find. That earlier image of Septimius Severus I showed, that blotted out face is young Gaeta. If that wasn't enough, it became a capital offense to speak or write Gaeta's name, and at least 20,000 people were murdered to enforce this. Interestingly, Caracalla's most notable legacy would be to give full Roman citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire, and some historians think this may have been done to try and protect himself from any backlash of the assassination. In a way, it could also serve to further establish Caracalla's propaganda over the assassination by trying to frame him as the more noble emperor who slayed his brother, the supposed tyrant, although history was not fooled. Gaeta avoided being fully lost from history for many reasons. One, Rome was just so big and bureaucratic and well established of a civilization that there was no way you'd get to everything. But two, there was one thing featuring Gaeta's likeness that they failed to fully destroy: his coinage. They definitely tried to melt as many coins of his as they could find, but you can imagine how easy it would be for hundreds of them to slip through the cracks. Speaking of Roman coins, collecting coins is pretty fun, and I like to collect them myself. But with older coins, you don't just want to keep them in a shoebox, you want to be able to display them for others to see. That's why this video is sponsored by Own a Piece of History UK, which is an Etsy shop that sells historic coins from multiple time periods and civilizations, and displays them inside beautifully captioned frames. Anyone who uses the link below with the coupon code EMPEROR gets 10% off. So thanks for the sponsorship, and now back to the video. In 1368, the Ming Dynasty was established in China by the Han Emperor, ending the period of Mongol rule. Naturally, like many new dynasties, a set of reforms were established in an attempt to improve China and consolidate his power. Military elites had their power reduced or purged, and the structure of civil administration was completely changed. Upon the Han Emperor's death in 1398, his firstborn son and heir Zhu Bao had already died a few years prior, meaning his grandson Zhu Yunwen would take the throne as the Jianwen Emperor. The Jianwen Emperor began undoing the Han Emperor's reforms, which was a problem because a lot of the power taken from the military nobility had been given to the other princes. So now the princes felt their power was threatened, and it didn't take long for rebellion to occur. The Han Emperor's fourth son, Zhu Di, joined the rebellion and by 1402 had burned the imperial palace to the ground, killing the Jianwen Emperor and most of his family inside. Zhu Di then took the throne as the Yongle Emperor and decided to erase Jianwen's legacy by editing the historical record and simply claiming the Han Emperor just lived another 4 uneventful years before he got the throne. The suppression of the Jianwen's emperor went so far as to the point of whole towns being erased to enforce this. Weirdly though, the violent nature of Jianwen's death led to sympathy among some areas of the populace. After all, he was curtailing the power of imperial princes, which could be seen by some as a sort of populist reform. By the 16th century, a myth had arose that the Jianwen Emperor somehow magically escaped the fire and was able to live the rest of his days quietly as a Buddhist monk, although we know this isn't true. In 1595, the Wanli Emperor, for whatever reason, decided to quietly restore the Jianwen Emperor to the historic record. Maybe by that point the sympathetic angle of his rule had even reached him? Who can say? In any case, all 3 of these stories go to show that erasing history has absolutely been tried, but it is a lot harder to truly accomplish. I'm Emperor Tigerstar, and I'll see you guys next time.